Now in this lesson we're going to be looking once more at phrasing using melodic concepts, melodic phrasing that is, and we'll be looking at some more two-note combinations as well as some just general tips on how to phrase and get the most out of your soloing. Once again, let's take a look at the two-note pattern. We use this note here, which was on the 5th fret of the 3rd string, going to the 7th fret on the 3rd string, and we created these phrases. And I also suggested for effect you may want to do what's called a hammer-on and fall back onto that note. Also, another way of looking at the two-note phrase is to go from here to here, again round it off nicely to create a melodic phrase, maybe to the bend. And once again, in the past I just mentioned the fact that when you do end on a bend, because you're stuck propping the string in the air, it's quite difficult to know what to do, and a two-note pattern winds up giving you a rather nice phrase to follow through. Once again. Try another two-note with that. Again, our phrase was two-note pattern, and our final phrase rounded off to this chord note. Now, if you want to get a little bit more complicated, you can do what I call a double two-note pattern. This really stretches your phrase out a little bit, but it's still utilizing the two-note pattern. And we're going to take frets 5 to 7 on the 3rd string and 7 to 5, and we're going to join them together with a technique which involves hitting the same note twice. It's quite simple if you take a look. You go from there to there, which is 5 to 7, and then you pick from 7 back to 5. And if you play it rather fast, you get quite a nice filled out phrase, especially if we round it off again to the nearest chord note. So we have, or we could go, and ending on this as our chord note, we just simply double the note up. Now, you can try jamming along and check that out and see if it works for you. Usually this particular double phrase tends to want to come in on the beat. It's a little tricky to pedal on the first note like we did with the other patterns, because it usually wants to come in like, but you can experiment with that and see what works. Now we can also take the same two notes, what I call a double two-note pattern, but instead of starting here, we can start on this note, which again, if you're not quite sure I am, it's the 7th fret on the 3rd string. So we would go here to here, double this note, and come back. So we've really done a kind of a reversal. We've gone from here to here, and then back. Played up to speed would be, and we'll look at the first one just to compare, starting here, and the new one, and again I'll just play the new one with some rounding off to the chord notes. Now I suggest you try those and see how they fit in with some of your other patterns, particularly, once again, following through from one of the phrases that wound up on a bend. They make very nice phrases, actually, in terms of melodic composition. A few more phrasing tips would be appropriate now, especially to help you while you're attempting to solo. Let's take a look at these ideas. Now, let's go back to our very first three-note pattern. If you recall, at the very beginning we pointed out that this note, while A minor was being played, was indeed a passing note. But you don't want to be too paranoid of touching that passing note and always gravitating to a chord note. What I mean to say really is, don't be afraid of that note. You can even start some solos on that note, and you just have to get a feel, especially if you pedal on it, you'll know intuitively how long that note can be played for before wanting to move on. So you can use it in patterns. Now I'm going to demonstrate with a bit of background rhythm. This is a sort of a Latin rock feel, but you'll see how I'll actually use that note and pedal on it and play around with it using the other patterns to effect. Now, you could hear from what I was doing that I stayed on that note for quite some time. Now, there's another note we should look at, too, in the scale, which is this one. I've neglected that for a reason, because I wanted you to work mostly with these first three notes and the 2 and the 4 note combinations. But this note, once again, shouldn't be avoided like the plague, really. It is a passing note, and it does want to resolve here. But there are several ways we can treat this. First, without any backing, let me show you and walk you through some of these ideas. Once again, we noticed that pedaling here was very effective for setting up a general timing on one note, pushing that note with interesting rhythms while we jam with either another guitarist, backing rhythm, or, if we're lucky, in a band. Now, this note can be used to reinforce some of the pedaling on this note. You may get something like... And at higher tempos, like the jazz rock pattern I just played then, or the Latin rock pattern, however you want to define it, you can hear some very effective use of this passing note. Once again with backing. Now, that's quite difficult to do, actually, because you have to get a feel for the pedal on the main chord note and know when to slip in this note. Best to experiment with it. You have moves like this. There's a nice easy one. And then you have, say, starting here. But you can see the ratio of chord note to passing note is quite heavy in the favor of this chord note here. In other words, you play more of this note than you do of this note, using this note simply for reinforcement to give it some kind of energy. And again, the quicker you play, the more we're moving away from melodic phrases and into dynamic, which we'll be covering very shortly. Dynamic phrases, as you recall, were more highly energized and a little quicker and less like something a person would sing. Far less melodic. Now, another treatment of this note, just to go on a bit, is, let me show you some patterns here we can do without so much pedaling involved. We can start on this note. It's like a slip note. You can begin your phrase with it. Or we could go... These are ideas I want you to try, actually. Once again. Then. So we're almost treating this note and this note as a 2-note pattern. We could be really adventurous and go from here to here, straight to the bend. It's another one. Then we can take off from there, however the mood fits. Or we could use this technique. We could go from here to here, across to the 3rd string, and down to the final chord note on the 4th string. Now, just to wind up, let me demonstrate, again with a backing, some of those ideas we've discussed, and hopefully this will give you some kind of inspiration to try it yourself.